you so very, very much. Well, we have experienced the seasons of Advent and of Christmas, seasons when we celebrate the coming of Christ into the world, and Christ came that we might know Him, that we might know His forgiveness, His renewal, and His grace. But now we are in Epiphany season, a season when we focus on the ministry of Christ, a season which extends an invitation to us to know Christ in a more complete way, an invitation to follow Him, an invitation to pattern our life after Christ. In Luke chapter 2, we have the story which Jesus read this morning about the boy Jesus in the temple, one of the few passages that really talks about sort of the childhood of Jesus. And at the conclusion of that story, and Jesus explains, as Jerry did so well, "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know that I had to be in my Father's house?" But they didn't understand what he was saying to them. And then it says that he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to him, but his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And as Jesus grew up, he increased in wisdom and in favor with God and with people. In some translations it says they were astonished at his understanding and wisdom, but they watched as he increased. It's another way of saying that he grew, he developed. And he developed in stature and in wisdom, in favor with men, and in favor with God. That's another way of saying that he grew physically and mentally and relationally and spiritually. I remember years ago, and I heard this point being made on several occasions by Oral Roberts when he reflected on the verse in John chapter 19, 23, where it was talking about the dividing up of Jesus' garment at the time of his crucifixion by the soldiers. And it says this garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. Seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. And I remember on more than one occasion Oral Roberts talking about this seamless garment, which he said signified the unity of the man. The integration of his personality and of his being, the wholeness of the man. And he was making the point as we go on in our path of Christian discipleship, we too should be striving for growth in wholeness. We too should be striving to increase physically and mentally and relationally and spiritually. And I believe indeed Jesus invites us to grow in Christian wholeness. You know, when we think of these areas, it's very evident that some of us do well in one or more areas, but then oftentimes neglect some of the others. And that can be devastating. Think, for example, physically. How many people do we know that maybe they have a good social life, maybe they're doing well in terms of progressing in their spiritual walk in some ways, maybe they're doing well relationally and occupationally and all of that, but somehow they tend to, like some of us, neglect the physical aspect of our being. They don't take care of themselves. They don't look after themselves. I remember my mother coming home one day, and she had been very involved, with the medical community, the osteopathic medical community for years. She had many friends who were physicians. And she came home one day and she's kind of sad, and a very close friend of hers who was a physician had had a stroke. He wasn't really up in age. I think he was in his late 50s at the time. He had a serious stroke. And she said, he's in the hospital, he's not doing well. And she said, when I think about this man, and I've known him for years, he had a wonderful reputation as a doctor. He knew his medicine. He was always up on the advances in medicine and things like that. He had a wonderful rapport and relationship with his patients. His patients just loved them. They knew he cared about them. He was active in his church. He was a leader at a local Methodist church here in the community. But she said, in all of the times I've known him, I've never known him to take a vacation. He will barely take a day off. He really doesn't spend any time dealing with himself. And she said, I can imagine the number of times when he has spoken to his own patients and said, now, you need to get some rest, and you need to cut back your stress level, and you need to get some exercise, and giving out medical advice to others. But she said it was just so difficult for him to step aside from his role of a physician and to find his own time. He didn't have any hobbies, like golf or tennis or swimming or anything that would give him some physical exercise. And so, here's a person that can have so many areas of life just going well, but like all of us, sometimes we neglect one area, like maybe taking care of ourselves physically or getting the rest or exercise we need, and the results can be devastating. Same way mentally, maybe there are people who attend to other aspects of life, but they are not growing in their faith. They are not growing in their mental capacities. Paul in Corinthians talks about people who are babes in Christ. Can you turn that a little bit more towards me? We don't get much breeze up here and it gets kind of stuffy. That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. This robe and this lack of air, it is a problem for me in the choir at times. Thank you so much. Oh, that's much better. Paul talks about people in Corinthians. And he said, by now you all ought to be teachers. But you're still babes in Christ. You don't have a growing faith. Hebrews, same thing. Where the writer of Hebrews says, you all need to go on to perfection. You need to go on and learn and grow. And sometimes there are people that they just get kind of stuck. They think, well, I've got my faith. They're not reading anymore. They're not studying anymore. They're not doing any Bible study anymore. And we find people, even the biblical writers, the writer of Hebrews says, some of you, even though you've been Christians for some time, you still need the milk of the Word. You need to grow in your mental capacity and understanding of your faith. And then what about relationally? I imagine some people can come to our mind. One man specifically comes to my mind. He was a professor when I was in seminary who was world-renowned because of his writing. Now, in terms of growing mentally, he had written a number of books. He was a recognized scholar on theology and the Bible, and very, very successful. But one of the problems was he just couldn't get along with anybody. He was finally released from the seminary because students didn't want to take his classes. He was they said, kind of short and impatient with them and kind of rude. And other colleagues at the seminary, he just couldn't get along. He didn't seem to have room. So here's a man that was really a brilliant mind. He was able, and no one questioned the depth of his faith, spiritually and mentally and occupationally. I don't know about his physical nature, whether he exercised or took care of himself. But he was constantly in conflict with people. He didn't seem to have the ability to get along with people. He needed to grow in his capacity to connect and get along with others. But then, most devastating of all, people who neglect their spiritual life. People who are maybe very successful at their careers and maybe they're able to connect and they're fun to be around, they're enjoyable to be around. They take care of themselves physically, but they never have time to really turn their hearts to God. They never have time really to read their Bibles or to spend some time in prayer or to attend a Sunday school class or join a Bible study group or do something, even come to worship that's going to nurture their faith. And Jesus talks about people like this and he says, what value is it to you to gain the whole world and to lose your soul? I mean, really, what is the value to do so well and to excel at every other area of life, but then somehow miss out on the basic relationship with God and our need to feed our spirit and spiritually to be alive and whole and well with God? The fact is that all four of these areas of life are important, as we see in the life of Jesus. He increased, he grew constantly in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and men. And he was like a seamless cloth. He grew, but he integrated. He strove for wholeness in his life. And so the fact that we try to pay attention to these various areas of our life and develop, it doesn't mean that each of us have to go out and run a marathon. Christy and I have a friend that came to watch her daughter run in a Tulsa run here recently. It was a marathon, and Christy and her friend got up early Sunday morning and went out with their cameras to take pictures as she went by. And she ran the whole marathon, and I forget what her time was, but it was remarkable. And they came by Sunday afternoon after the service was over and everything to tell us goodbye. And I thought, man, if I'd have done that, I'd have been ready to collapse. And she was just ready to drive back to Dallas. Here we go. I mean, it acted like, it'd been a trip to the donut store or something. It didn't affect her at all. Now everybody doesn't have to be in that good a shape. You don't have to become, I do that for my grandkids every once in a while just to show them, they're not impressed, but you don't have to become a muscle man or a muscle woman or a marathon runner or something like that in order to just basically be in shape. But it's a physical area. It doesn't mean that you have to get a PhD in theology or in any subject. It doesn't mean you have to push yourself academically to that level, but it does mean that we have to pay attention to our mental processes and keeping our mind sharp and alive and pressing on and growing. It doesn't mean that we have to have the greatest number of Facebook friends in order to grow relationally. If you don't have 5,000 friends on your Twitter account or something like that, that's okay. But we all need to have friends. We need to be connected with our family, those are alive. We need to be connected with our neighbors and our friends and have healthy relationships. In order to grow spiritually, you don't have to become a monk. You don't have to give your whole life to the monastery and just sit around and pray 24 hours a day. But you do need some time every day. You do need some time of biblical reflecting on the Bible reading, whether that's through the upper room or the Sunday school quarterly or just a Bible reading plan. We all need some point every day where we can connect with God and spend some time with Him and grow in our spirit. We need to, each and every one of us, follow Christ in His manner of life, which involves an invitation to a growing lifestyle and striving for wholeness. I remember many years ago, it was just about this time of season, right after Christmas, that a student from NSU, a member of my church, asked if she could visit with me, and she came by to visit. And she said Christmas and Advent and everything had been very, very meaningful to her. And she said, now is the start of a new year. And she says, I'm getting off to a new start. And she said, one of my goals this year is to get all of the noise out of my life. And I said, well, what does that mean? That's an interesting phrase. I kind of like that. Get all the noise out of your life. She said, well, I've thought about, because I think I'd given this same message or something similar upon this text. It rolls around every year in the lectionary at this time. And she says, I've been thinking about your quest and your message for wholeness. And she said, I thought about that area of relationships, and I've taken some steps forward in that. And I said, really? She said, yes, I broke up with my boyfriend. I said, oh, okay. I said, well, I guess sometimes growing relationally is discontinuing certain. She said, in this case, that's been a big help. So she's broken up with the boyfriend. She says, I get up in the morning and I go jogging for a little while, and then I take my shower and I'm off to school, and I spend my time at school. She's an optometry student. Says in the afternoon I come home and I spend some time in prayer and reading my Bible. She said it's really one of the first times in my life, really you're urging that I'm actually setting aside, I think, what I'd refer to as a quiet time every day, that it's important for us to have some quiet time every day when we're praying and reading and reflecting. And she says, I now have scheduled a quiet time. She said, I'm striving to find balance in my life. And so I thought, what a wonderful example and what a wonderful lesson to learn so early in life, because balance is sometimes hard to achieve and hard to find. But here we are pretty early in the new year, and the new year is upon us. Our goal is to be faithful to Jesus, to be a faithful follower of Him, and following Him involves striving for wholeness. It does involve at times setting some goals and making some resolutions. And I've heard people at times, at this time of year, say, this is going to be the year. This is really going to be the year that I read the Bible through read the entire Bible through. I've got a plan. This is going to be the year that I'm going to do 10,000 steps today. I've got my Fitbit, it's set, it's synced to my phone. I'm ready to go. I'm going to get 10,000 steps a day. This is going to be the year when I pay attention to this. This is going to be the year, someone has told me that I'm going to get back to Sunday school. I've needed to be in a study group, in a fellowship group, and I've kind of missed that. So you're going to be join a Sunday school class or join a Bible study or some type of group. This is going to be a year. And the question is, what will this be the year for you? What will this be the year for you? Which of these areas are you doing well in? Which of these areas do you need to give some attention to? Which of these areas is lacking in your life in terms of wholeness? And sometimes it involves making some very, very difficult decisions. I received a text from a friend of mine the other day, and he said, Alan, I've had to make such a difficult decision in my life. He said, you may not be aware of this, but he said, months ago, I bought tickets, 2 box seat tickets for the Super Bowl. I paid $1,500 each for those tickets. And he says, now I've realized that the Super Bowl is on the same day that we've scheduled my wedding. And he said, I hope you can help me and pass this word along. If you know anybody who could take my place, he said it's going to be at 3 o'clock at the St. Mark's Church, and the bride will be the one in the white dress. And if you know anyone that can help me out, have them just give me a call. Sometimes we have to make hard decisions about our life and our goals and the balance or the lack of balance in our life, or where we're going to go. And what really, when we come to the end of next year, what is life really going to look like? What is our life really going to mean? Because each of these areas, as we can see in Jesus' life, even as reflected when he was a young boy, is so important, and God calls us to a lifestyle of wholeness and growth. Jesus came that we might have life, and he says in John 10, I came that you might have it abundantly. And I believe that abundant life is found when we allow him to be the Lord of our life and to speak to us in every area of life, our mental capacity, our mental development, our spiritual development, our relationships, where we need to make improvements in them. Who do we need to reach out to? Who do we need to connect to? Who do we need to say I'm sorry to? Who do we need to just befriend and enter into and taking care of ourselves physically? The abundant life comes from following Jesus in his fullness and his wholeness, and striving for the abundant life that he offers for each and every one of us. Thanks be to God. Amen.